Okay, right from the get-go, I am going to be picking Robert Whittaker to beat Paulo Costa, but as a massive, massive Robert Whittaker fan, I am so nervous for this weekend because Robert Whittaker must have a classic vintage Robert Whittaker performance. I have been following Robert Whittaker for the longest time. There was a time there before the real wave of Anzac talent that we had back in the Mark Hunt, Robert Whittaker days, where these were really like the only Aussie names that we could get behind as I was watching UFC, getting into the sport. Now we have this huge wave of Anzac talent. There's so many great Aussies and Kiwis going into the UFC, but Robert Whittaker has been that one that has been there for me for so long throughout my entire UFC fandom journey. And after watching what happened with him and Dricus du Plessis, him going into this one against Paulo Costa sort of scares me a little bit because it's a real turning point for Robert Whittaker's career. I'm, to me, personally, getting the same feelings I was getting for Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje, where it's one of those fights where it's like, right, are we still on here? Someone's career is about to be defined in a couple of days. And then, of course, that's happening with Alexander Volkanovski this weekend as well. It's very, very nerve-wracking as an Australian this weekend. Very nerve-wracking. I'm going to need a couple of beers. Why is this so important? Why is this something that I wanted to talk about? It's because this is one of those fights that's going to determine whether Robert Whittaker is still one of the boys or a gatekeeper on his extremely long road back to the title, even if he does get one back to the title. Robert Whittaker is someone who was that number 2 guy for years. He was the Max Holloway to Israel Adesanya. You know what I mean? He was that person that was just right there. And if he wins this fight, he is still right there. It is a massive win. But if Paulo wins this, it's not like Paulo's going to skip the line over Israel Adesanya for a title shot or Jared Cannonier or all this talk of Khamzat Chimaev. It does seem like his next fight will be for a title shot. It just seems to be where it's not even like Paulo Costa is going to skip over Sean Strickland, right? Sean Strickland had a razor close fight with the current champion. So to Paulo, there is just this, am I still here or not? Paulo, to me, isn't even really, I don't even consider him a UFC fighter. I consider him a PFL fighter who is in the UFC. I mean, this fight, technically, is going to be a fight of pillow-fisted opponents going at each other at different skill levels. And Paulo Costa is not the most skilled fighter in the world, where Robert Whittaker was always perceived as this incredibly skilled fighter until we got to the Dricus du Plessis situation. So with Paulo Costa, win or lose, to me, he sort of seems like he's in the same place, except he maybe legitimizes himself as a UFC fighter. It's just been so long since we've seen a really impressive performance from Paulo. The kind of fans that Paulo Costa has are meme lord casual fans. They're fans of him because of what he does on Instagram and what he does on Twitter. They cannot be fans of him of what he does in the cage. Let's just look at Paulo's last fight, right? It was against Luke Rockhold, and it was a horribly skilled fight. That's not to say it wasn't fun. It was an incredibly fun fight to watch, but the skill level was disgusting. And there are so many excuses brought up that, oh, well, it was at altitude. But it's not like that fight happened in a bubble. It's not like every other fight on the card wasn't at altitude. That fight, along with all the other fights, were at altitude, and all the other fighters on the card were understandably having cardio issues, but they still looked good. And it is widely accepted that out of all the fights that happened on that card, Paulo Costa versus Luke Rockhold was the worst looking and sloppiest fight out of all of those fights. So you can't just be like, well, I mean, Paulo Costa looked horrible in his last fight, but it was at altitude, Doug. They were all at altitude, mate. They were all at altitude, and Paulo was the worst looking one on the entire card, maybe next to Luke Rockhold, who went on to retire from MMA after that. That was Paulo's last fight. And then before that, you've got the Marvin Vettori fight. Now, Marvin Vettori has been exposed as not the most skilled striker in the world by Jared Cannonier, hasn't he? And Paulo lost to that guy, even with a huge weight advantage. So Paulo is this bloke who doesn't fight very often, isn't a very skilled fighter, and hasn't had a knockout since bloody, I don't know, Robbie Lawler or something. He hasn't had a knockout in ages. That's not to say Whittaker is a knockout machine. I'm just saying Paulo Costa is ranked 6th or 7th, which is disgusting. This is why I look at Paulo Costa as a bit of a PFL fighter, which is why, to me, it is so important that Robert Whittaker has a vintage Robert Whittaker performance here. It's what I'm saying. Like, if we are going to still consider Robert Whittaker as one of the guys, we are talking Israel Adesanya, Sean Strickland, Jared Cannonier, right there at the top of the division, which is what Robert was considered as for so long. If he is still going to be there, he cannot just beat Paulo Costa. He has to have a classic vintage masterclass on Paulo Costa. Because if he wins that fight by decision, which I think he will, but if he wins that fight by decision and it's a sloppy decision, it's one of those decisions where the audience, us, the fans, are like, ooh, could have gone either way. That does prove to us that there is a significant drop in Robert Whittaker, and it puts him in that position where the UFC start using his name as former champion, former title contender, almost drew with Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker. That name against newer up-and-coming fighters, and I am not ready to see that yet as a Robert Whittaker fan. So not only do I expect, I am sorry, Robbie, all right? I know you're in Australia. I know we're pretty much neighbors, mate. You're definitely going to see this video. But I am putting all the pressure on Robert Whittaker's back. And when I'm watching this, I am watching this with all the pressure on the back of, you can't just win, mate. You cannot just win. We have got to dominate Paulo Costa if he shows up to fight on the day. And you never know with Paulo. Until the cage door closes behind him, I still don't know who Robert Whittaker's fighting this weekend. He might not be fighting anyone. We might not even get to see him fight. Paulo might not even show up. He's just a meme lord. He should go to the PFL. On the technical side of it, I am hoping and I am seeing that Robert Whittaker is going to put on a technical masterclass to Paulo Costa. Paulo is going to be swinging in heavily, trying to knock Whittaker out, trying to throw these heavy shots. Whittaker is going to be able to teep and down kick at the knee and move out of range and throw that jab head kick that he is so good at. I am hoping to see that classic vintage Robert Whittaker performance. That is the way I do see the fight going. And if it's anything less, I'm going to be a little bit concerned. And that's just a lot of pressure for Robert Whittaker to carry, but that's what I think is going to happen going into this fight. Let me know, who do you think is going to win this fight? And how do you think they're going to win this fight? What are you expecting to see from each fighter? Put that down there in the comments for me. It's very, very nerve-wracking, this one, because it needs to be so high. The expectations are so much. So let me know what you think down there in the comments. And of course, I will see you all in the next video.